Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Tuckahoe Historic Preservation Commission meeting. I would like to officially call to order tonight's meeting of May 24th, 2023. To get things moving, I would like to please ask if everyone would rise, and together we recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Excellent, thank you very much. And just as it is so nice to see everyone here tonight, it is an honor and a pleasure to introduce the newest member of Tuckahoe's Historic Preservation Commission, Miss Peggy Bells.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to jumping right in.
And jump in we will. Peggy was appointed by Marandino and the Village Board of Trustees at their meeting earlier this month. At that meeting, Marandino read Peggy's bio, and it is full of legal experience, law enforcement. Peggy has demonstrated many times and in many ways her commitment to this village. We are very grateful to have you on board, Peggy, and thank you for your commitment to continuing to serve your community. With that said, our board is 5, and I would like to call for a roll. So why don't I start, and then Peggy, if you can get us moving down this way. I am Jenny Steinhagen.
Peggy Bellis.
Ladislav Castellanos.
Greg Luisi.
Super. We are all here. For tonight's agenda, we do have an administrative item that we need to take care of right now in the beginning, and that is in reference to the approval of some past meeting minutes. We have 2 sets of meetings that we will approve. The first set is from March. These are meeting minutes from our March 23rd meeting. So I'm going to ask the members who were present at that meeting to participate in this vote. That would include myself, Member Abrams, and Member Luisi. So if all members at the March 23rd meeting have had a chance to review the meeting minutes, and if there are no questions or objections, can I please ask for a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
I second the motion.
And I am in favor, so all in favor? Aye. We pass the March meeting minutes unanimously. And now on to the meeting minutes from our April 20th meeting. At that meeting were Member Castellanos, Member Luisi, and myself. So the 3 of us will participate in that vote. If all of the members have had a chance to review the meeting minutes, if there are no questions or objections, can I please ask for a motion to approve the April 20th meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Super. I am in favor. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. There we go. Our meeting minutes are approved for our last 2 meetings. So now we can work our way into what is the heart of the discussion tonight. On our agenda, we have a public hearing to consider a Certificate of Appropriateness application for 230 White Plains Road, also known as the Ward House. So you will hear tonight 230 White Plains Road and the Ward House used interchangeably. That is okay. It is the name that was also provided in the landmark application for 230 White Plains Road. Before we get to that public hearing, and before the applicant comes up to present the application, I would like to set the stage, to provide a little bit of context and background, how we got to where we are. So let us step back in time a little over a year. In February of 2022, a completed landmark nomination was submitted for 230 White Plains Road. That then triggered the process that this board participates in, which is the holding of meetings and the announcement of public meetings to discuss this landmark. It took place in March of 2022 that we announced that public meetings would be held in April. Meetings were held in April. They were held over a number of months until June. And in June 9th, if I can read my own writing, June 9th of 2022, the Tuckahoe Historic Preservation Commission took a vote on whether or not to landmark 230 White Plains Road. That,
Madam Chair, you just, at that meeting, you were taking a vote to recommend that the village board of trustees.
precisely, and an important distinction, because this board makes recommendations through their unanimous vote to the Board of Trustees. So in June, the Historic Preservation Commission took a unanimous vote to recommend that the Tuckahoe Village Board of Trustees landmark 230 White Plains Road. And that was based on the fact that the commission concluded that 230 White Plains Road strongly met 5 of the 7 criteria required for landmarking in the village of Tuckahoe. That includes historical significance, architectural significance, social and cultural significance. This board voted unanimously in favor of the application. It was passed to the Board of Trustees. They opened up a public meeting. They took a vote after keeping that hearing open, and they unanimously voted to landmark 230 White Plains Road. That is not the discussion tonight. The discussion is not whether or not 230 White Plains Road should be landmarked. 230 White Plains Road has been landmarked. Now, what we will be discussing tonight is an application to, we'll let the applicant speak to it, but a demolition application for 230 White Plains Road. Now, I need to refer to the legislation so that I can let everyone know why we are having a certificate of appropriateness discussion for the demolition of 230 White Plains Road. And for anyone following along with Tuckahoe's historic preservation legislation, I'm on page 5 in section 6, which is the alteration, demolition, removal, or new construction affecting local landmarks or historic districts. The Historic Preservation Commission is responsible for the approval or disapproval of proposed changes to historic properties designated under this local law. No person shall carry out any alteration, restoration, reconstruction, demolition, new construction, or relocation of a designated local landmark or property within a designated historic district without first obtaining a certificate of appropriateness. That brings us here tonight. On the next page in section 7C, the criteria for issuing a certificate of appropriateness states, the commission shall approve a certificate of appropriateness only if it determines that the proposed work will not have a substantial adverse effect on the aesthetic, historical, or architectural significance and value of the local landmark or historic district. The following page on 7C3, demolition, removal, or relocation, it states, a certificate of appropriateness for demolition, removal, or relocation of a local landmark shall only be approved if the commission determines that the applicant has established a hardship, or if written reports from the building department and or other licensed engineers or architects with experience in rehabilitation or reuse of historic structures have determined that the landmark presents an imminent and unavoidable threat to the public health, safety, and welfare. And in 72, it says the commission shall hold a public hearing prior to rendering a decision on any application for a certificate of appropriateness. So we are obligated to recognize what has already taken place, what the legislation spells out regarding what this commission does and how we do that. So with that said,
Chair, if I just may clarify
please.
something, you did a great job. Synopsis, of course. The landmarking of the Board of Trustees, that's being challenged by the applicant, and that's in the courts right now, so that ultimately will be decided by the court.
Thank you.
But that was the extra step, so that's still pending there.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, we will add that to the record, and we will also add to tonight's record, before we invite anyone and everyone who is interested in speaking about the topic at hand tonight, that this commission has received to date 12 letters. When 230 White Plains Road took steps to submit the Certificate of Appropriateness application, they put a big sign. And we thank them for following the legislation requirements for that. They put a sign outside of the building which indicated if anyone who couldn't attend the meeting wanted to submit written comments, they could do so by mailing them to the village. We received 12. They came from people who used to live on Winslow Circle in Hobart. people from Bronxville, people from upstate New York. We had letters from Michigan, Arizona, and Florida. We also received a letter from Paris, France. And I don't know if any of the members had anything to add to that.
Well, one thing, I've spent many days in this particular room in my past life, and it's really encouraging to see so many seats taken on this. It just shows public interest. It shows people are paying attention to what's going on, and they have a voice that they want us to hear. And I did make my way through all of those letters, and people took a lot of time to get their thoughts down. So we did read them all.
And if I could summarize all 12 of them, 100% were asking that the structure at 230 White Plains Road be saved. And the discussion tonight, I will reiterate, is on whether or not there is any justifiable cause for the Ward House to be demolished. We're getting closer to this public hearing, but I think it's fair for me to ask everyone if you could, of course, direct your comments to the issue at hand tonight, which is the architectural question, which we will hear from the applicant. In fact, before we vote to open up the public hearing, we would like to invite the applicant to come forward and present. By all means, if they would like to come up first, we'll listen to the presentation and move on to the public hearing. Did we figure out the microphone situation?
Deal. Good evening, folks. I think in an effort to minimize the brain damage that you all may incur tonight, I'm going to greatly compress my opening comments and allow the team to handle everything. Essentially, my name is Greg Holcomb, and I'm the applicant for the Certificate of Appropriateness to demolish the structure located at 230 White Plains Road. The house, which is unsafe and unstable, is located in a residential A5 zone. It's limited to single-family use and nothing else. The property cannot be adapted for any other use, whether by me or by a potential purchaser, in order to earn a reasonable economic return. Parking is limited, and theoretical uses advanced by members of a recently formed not-for-profit include a classroom, a gift shop, an Airbnb, and a dance hall for proms for young adults. None of these uses are permissible in an A5 zone. Efforts to sell the home to the same not-for-profit were unsuccessful, as their fundraising, to be diplomatic, was less than robust. The house was landmarked after I acquired the property, hence my hardship was not self-created. Significant structural defects have been identified relating to the existing home. The prior owner managed the house, as well as General William T. Sherman executed his march through Atlanta, destroying any historical attributes relating to the interior and the exterior of the home. The landmarking of the home and the lot upon which it is situated at the time of the designation is incapable of earning a reasonable return, as is demonstrated by any competent financial analysis. To be clear, the fact is that the home is in disrepair, falling down, and not safe due to many years of neglect. There's no certificate of occupancy for any use. Additionally, the home is now on the tax rolls, paying full property and school taxes. You are in receipt of a proposed plan for a single-family residence that will respect the historic importance of this site. No other realistic plan exists to honor this site. Appreciate your consideration, and with your permission, I'll just turn things over to the folks that are handling this matter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Lee Lefkowitz from the law firm Zarin and Steinmetz, representing the applicant, the owner of the property at 230 White Plains Road. The property is currently improved with a 3-story colonial-style home that is currently in a state of severe disrepair, having been neglected and modified over the years with poor construction, and being the subject of neglect after it was purchased by Concordia College in the 1940s. Two-story addition with a cellar was added, and other modifications were made to the building for its use as a college dorm. My client purchased the site, and it was landmarked very shortly after he brought it back onto the tax rolls and after he purchased it. Therefore, it was both restricted and made tax-paying at the same time, and it has no certificate of occupancy, and he can't use it otherwise. No meaningful offers have been made to purchase it from him or use it in any way other than a single-family home. As your counsel indicated, we've challenged the landmarking, but our hope is that we can reach a resolution here via the Certificate of Appropriateness process. And Madam Chair, you indicated that many wish to quote-unquote save the structure at 230 White Plains Road. We believe that our application is the straightest path to actually saving the historic nature of the property. We've done that by putting together an application that would, yes, demolish the current structure, but replace it with a structure that honors the history of the old architecture. And we're, of course, willing to work with your board to ensure that that proposed structure meets the architectural style that you're looking for, and would sufficiently honor the structure there. And we're also willing to honor the history of the site with a plaque or other ways that we may be able to honor it, the actual history of what took place at the site, rather than being constrained by the materials that were used to build this structure, which themselves don't have the historic value, right? The history of it and the education of it is what we'd hope to propagate by building something that is actually usable, not an eyesore, and likewise advances the education in terms of honoring the structure and educating the public as to what was there and what happened there. Tonight, you're going to hear from our architect, you're going to hear from our engineer. Our architect will explain some of the structural deficiencies with the property, why it's unsafe and unstable and a hazard to the health, safety, and welfare, because it can't be used. And he's also going to speak to the proposed structure and how we believe it honors the current structure that's there. And our engineer, who did an inspection of the property, is going to speak to those structural defects in great detail. In short, any proposals to repair this would cost tremendously more than it would be to replace this building. And in fact, those repairs would be so substantial that effectively what we're talking about is the same thing. It's a demolition either way. We're removing all of the unusable elements there and rebuilding the house either way. It's just that the idea of trying to preserve random aspects of the building by tearing out only certain parts and replacing only certain parts would be so surgical and expensive that replacing them is the only way to avoid a hardship here. The replacement structure will maintain the character of the property as well as the neighborhood. It's nearly identical in size. It incorporates the same colonial style as the existing building. The exterior will be the same color. It will feature, the new features will match or be similar in terms of design and color and texture from the outside. And it's important to actually note there are no historical photographs of the building from back way it used to look before it was destroyed, so it's hard to know exactly what the building used to look like when it was in its historical state. For all these reasons, we believe that our application meets the criteria that should guide your board in terms of approving a certificate of appropriateness, because our proposal will not have a substantial adverse effect on the historical or architectural significance. As we said, we will honor those aspects, and in fact, we'll improve the aesthetic value in that currently the aesthetic value is non-existent. We meet those standards, including that the applicant proposes to restore the property to what its historic use was, which was a single-family dwelling. The historic character of the property, including the stone steps and the wall out front, will be preserved, as well as the design and the orientation of the structure and the color and scale. The roof shape, the portico, the setbacks will all be similar. And the building's materials that we'll use, while updated, will reflect and resemble the old structure. So all that said, due to the neglect that this structure underwent over the past 80 years. It's in such a state of disrepair that the only way to save it is through our application, we believe. And it would be a significant economic hardship on my client were he to not be permitted this certificate of appropriateness. With that being said, I'd like to turn it over to our architect, Louis Campana, who's going to explain the application in further detail. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commission. I'm Louis Campana on behalf of the applicant and architect for the new structure at 230 White Plains Road. I had the privilege of being raised in Tuckahoe, and I'm very interested and familiar with its history. I come from a family which spans 6 generations here in the village, with a great-great-grandfather who worked at the marble quarry at the end of the 19th century. I'm also quite familiar with the Ward House. I grew up just 3 doors down at 242 White Plains Road, where I lived for 27 years. In 2010, I moved to the Gentry up on Fairview Avenue, and since 2016, my wife and I, along with our 2 children, live on the south end of Eastchester on Pasadena Road. Just last year, my office was selected to document and measure the existing conditions of the Ward House. But prior to that, we researched public records located here at the building department and just outside the doors at the Marble Museum. We found that there is no record of any work within the original portion of the house, besides an attic conversion, which was completed in 1960, approximately 20 years after the property was purchased by Concordia College. The only other permits on file were for exterior work, which were all completed within the last 13 years. The first permit was number 3838, issued on August 17, 2010, and this was to install asphalt roofing. Permit number 3954 was issued on March 4th, 2011, and this was to rebuild the existing chimneys and finish them with cement stucco as opposed to the original brick veneer. And finally, permit 4040, issued on July 18th, 2011. This was for the removal of existing wood shingles and installation of vinyl siding. We also found drawings dating back to 1960 for a sprinkler system which was installed to service the structure as a dormitory. These drawings showed the existing plans or existing layout of the house at that time. When it came time to measure and entering into the house, I was confronted with something that I wouldn't ever have thought the house looked like. Quite frankly, from living next to it for so many years, I was shocked at the level of neglect and deterioration that the home had experienced through the ownership of Concordia College. This was also the case with 225 White Plains Road, as we knew as the Schultz House, and the Fuller House at 205 White Plains Road. All 3 were owned and left in disrepair by the college. After drafting the existing conditions, we found a major disparity between the existing current condition and the drawings that were uncovered in the building department from 1960. There were kitchens and bathrooms which didn't comply with any code, scattered throughout the first floor, and additional bathrooms scattered throughout the second floor along with the first floor, including walls that have been relocated and removed without any permits or drawings on file with the building department. This renders all of the work done to the original 1797 structure, at least since 1960, as illegal and without any proper inspection by town officials or professional oversight. I think we can all agree that the illegal and haphazard alterations done by the college, coupled with the permits issued by the village dating back only 13 years, aided in the further depletion of the architectural significance, but more importantly, had a major detrimental impact on the structural integrity of the 225-year-old structure. There are many other old historic homes throughout Eastchester and Bronxville. These homes are owned and beautifully maintained by single-family residents. To be more specific, there's the Masterton Dusenberry House and also the Morgan House, just located down south on White Plains Road in the Bronxville corridor. what makes the Ward House unique in comparison is that it was owned and poorly maintained by the college. The damage done by Concordia for at least the past 83 years, which equates to approximately 40% of its current lifespan, is substantial and was clearly left to the new owner in disrepair. So much so that the structure cannot be adapted for any other use as it currently exists. And it is clear and quite evident that this is not a self-created issue. I do believe that the village and other interested parties were living under the false assumption that the Ward House was in good hands with Concordia College. But perhaps we wouldn't be here right now if the interested parties took more interest in preserving the building as opposed to pushing the history, the story of the history for all these years. There was a clear missed opportunity to have an institution like Concordia College take the initiative in preserving the structure. We all know that this is not the case, and you're now faced with mandating a private owner to undergo the financially impracticable and burdensome task of fixing what has been done illegally to the bones of the house for the better part of a century. The state in which the house is in and the way it is constructed warrants a full interior and partial exterior demolition to clearly show you that the house is in disrepair and structurally unsafe. Through my experience working with older homes, this type of work must be done meticulously and carefully. I've calculated this demolition work to be approximately $125,000, which is an unnecessary burden on the owner just to prove to the commission that the house as it stands is a hazard to the public and a major liability for the owner and should be reconstructed. These costs include but are not limited to careful removal of interior wall and ceiling finishes, removal of approximately 50% of the exterior finishes to expose the outside face of the current framing, carting and dumpsters, temporary toilet facilities, tree protection, silt fencing, construction fence, removal of all insulation, removal of all piping and wires that penetrate structure, temporarily shoring compromised structure, structural engineering fees to design the temporary shoring, architectural fees for application and permitting, village permit fees, and subsequent hearings with the commission to allow such work to commence. As the architect for the reconstructed dwelling, it's my main objective to preserve the general character of the home and restore its presence it once had in our community through reconstruction. We propose to revert the property back to its original single-family use while taking into consideration the necessities of modern living. In terms of the proposed design, there are elements that we propose to restore and preserve. These elements are some of the most distinctive features of the property. The location and orientation of the existing dwelling on site, including its setbacks to Winslow Circle and White Plains Road. The shape and size of the existing main portion of the dwelling. The water well in the rear yard. The retaining wall along the northern side of the property, and the stone carriage steps on the front lawn. Some of the architectural elements that we propose to replace by reconstruction are the clapboard siding, which there is evidence that it was shingle siding. And if you look at the top of Stein Hall on the dormer in the attic, you can see what that would look like. Window sizes and configurations, the color of the siding, trim and windows, window and door shutters, the roof pitch, first and second floor ceiling heights. Other elements to be reconstructed in general conformity with the existing conditions, and that is the front portico, the back porch, the enclosed corner of the back porch, and the built-in Yankee gutter. The elements to be removed or replaced in general conformity with existing character, but different in form, notwithstanding any comments and reasonable requests by the commission, is the roof line and the decorative brackets below the eaves and the rake. Here are the proposed drawings that were filed with the application. Here's the site plan. You can see the footprint of the home. The footprint is in the exact location it currently exists today. We're going to be also maintaining the front walkway, like I mentioned, the carriage steps, and then the wall along the northern side with a minor modification to shorten it so it meets the new eastern wing of the house. The back porch will remain consistent with how it appears today, although because of the change to a single-family use, we're proposing to extend one side of that covered porch to make it usable for the residents. We have the well located in the back here. And a lot of what we're proposing, especially with the retaining walls on site, because the grade simply recedes down towards the east, we are proposing to reuse the stone in the foundation to construct these site walls. And if we could potentially reuse the existing marble stepping stones that create the patios, we'd be doing that as well. On the eastern side, where we have that existing flat roof addition, in order to make this usable and conform to the modern necessities of living, we will be creating a garage with carriage house doors, which would be facing east, with the intention of maintaining the front look of the house and not disturbing that with garage doors and a large driveway. The driveway would simply sneak down, down and around that retaining wall. There is a driveway there now, but it is it's in disrepair. We did come up with two iterations of the exterior elevations for your consideration. And again, your comments will be taken into consideration to develop these further. In terms of the exterior, we're proposing to maintain the architectural detailing of the front portico, but changing the proportions slightly to give it a bit more of a robust look. Currently, the columns are very slender and is out of scale, quite frankly, with the covering. I also believe that was an addition that was put on at some point throughout history, but it wasn't put on at the time this house was constructed. And the reason I say that is because there's evidence based on the foundation and the stairs that the house was actually flipped in function. The stairs used to go in the opposite direction. The back of the house used to be the front of the house, and the front of the house used to be the rear. The windows, again, same size configuration, double hung windows with the black shutters. The siding will match what's there today. However, this could look pretty handsome with shingle siding as well. Yes, the roof will be asphalt, so that would match today's condition. But I don't know if you can see here, but a lot of the damage to the house has been caused by the way it was constructed so close to the ground around it, more specifically on the western side and the northern side. So the structure is actually buried beneath the elevation of the soil around the house. So we're proposing to lift the house approximately 18 inches to allow the site, in terms of the ground, to remain as it is, instead of regrading the property and disturbing its visual impact that it has today, and quite frankly, throughout history. So that would help protect the new structure against termite damage and rot on the sills, which currently exist today. We are changing the front door. The front door is a single front door with two side lights, solid door. We're going to be changing that to a door with 2/3 glass, 1/3 solid panel at the rear. And we're going to match that with the side lights as well and include a transom to reflect the arch of the portico. We have our corner pilasters, which would be consistent with what is there today. And the eastern wing will take on a different shape. It'll be a bit shorter than it is today. And the reason for that is to create enough backup space so the cars can back out of the garage safely. This is the elevation everyone is familiar with as you come up Winter Hill. You can see again, the house has been raised. We're extending the rear porch to make that usable for the residents who will eventually hopefully move in. The one disparity here that is different from the existing condition is the roof line. Instead of a mansard roof with a flat portion on it, we're keeping the roof pitch. However, we're changing that to a gable roof, which still conforms with the makeup of the neighborhood and the general character of the existing house. This is the rear elevation of the house. You can see it's quite consistent with what's happening today, except for the fire escape stairs that are coming out of the existing house, and the covered exit coming out of the eastern wing. What we've done is we have now included a living space, master bedroom above, and also family room down below, with a mudroom and garage downstairs. This would be a new chimney mass added to the structure. This enclosed corner of the porch currently was used as a bedroom, but it actually is, it doesn't meet the minimum requirement for a bedroom per the New York State Code. So what we are proposing to do here is create a basement mudroom with a stair that comes up into this glass vestibule, and then you have access directly into the living space. Here's the extended portion of the porch here. We're introducing new doors from the living space to be able to easily utilize the amenity of the new back porch. And this is the eastern elevation here, and the only one thing I want to point out here is the garage that's down low. Currently, it's just a brick wall with a couple windows in it. But again, the way we detail this is we want to reflect the character in the era it was originally built, or originally rebuilt, I should say. So that's the first iteration. The second iteration is very similar, but there's a bit more changes to that one. I'll show you that next. So here we have here we have the north elevation, and the difference here is that we've added dormers on the roof. I think it looks quite handsome. It does create a better condition with the gable roof that we're introducing. We've also included a gable roof on the eastern wing as well. The western elevation, the only difference you can see here is a side profile of the dormers at the front of the house. And also we've incorporated a pitched roof over a low slung pitched roof over the back porch. Currently there's issues with drainage on the back porch, so instead of having flat roofs, those pitched roofs would help mitigate any potential issues down the line. Here you simply just see how that pitched roof works with the windows on the second floor. With just enough space, approximately 6 inches for proper flashing above that roof to prevent further water issues. And there's the gable end on the east side of the house. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to field any questions from the commission. If not, we can hand it over to the structural engineer at this point.
Well, thank you very much to you and Mr. Steinmetz. I believe we have already started receiving quite a bit of information here, which will inform the public hearing. We can begin our questioning after we vote to open the public hearing.
Well, the board can ask questions whenever they like. So if you'd like to ask questions now, that's fine, or you can wait till later.
Okay, so we have both of those options. If I could just jump in quickly, again, thank you for your time and the work that you've put into this. We have heard on a few occasions references to the exterior primarily, more so than the interior. And I should point out that 230 White Plains Road, as a Tuckahoe landmark, is exterior only. So this commission is responsible for the exterior. In the interior, only to the extent that interior is related or relevant or could potentially compromise the exterior. So when we hear exterior, this board is looking at exterior, which you've thankfully focused on also with your drawings there. I also heard on a number of occasions the term hardship come up, not so much with the architectural report, but more so from legal counsel and also from the owner. Is now an appropriate time for me to inform everyone what we're talking about when we're talking about hardship?
Yeah, that's fine. So it's really, Certificate of Appropriateness is a two-step process. The first thing they look at is a demolition, saying this is structurally unsound, and there's certain terminology that basically says it's a safety issue. If the board denies it on those grounds, the second step would be the applicant gets to come back and say now it's an economic hardship. So those issues with economics is really for the second step if they get there. But right now the board should be focusing on this safety issue now for the public.
Okay, so if a claim is made that something will cost money to fix, for example, or if there is a financial issue being incurred, that is not what we're discussing tonight. Rather, tonight we are looking at whether or not an exception to the landmark legislation can be made to allow a demolition because not a hardship, but rather proof of imminent or unavoidable harm to the public health, safety, and welfare is made. I just want to make sure that we're clear on that.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, cool. So that will help us to, I think, focus some of the information being provided, some of the questions that we can ask. And thank you, Mr. Campana, for differentiating between the north and south and the front and back, because we do know from the historical record, and there are pictures at the Westchester County Historical Society, that what we refer to now as the back, where the porch is, the north-facing side, that was the front in the beginning. So we do have images of that, but thank you for pointing that out. I think for the most part, as this meeting progresses, when we refer to the front, we're talking about what we typically consider the front, which is the south.
Winslow Circle.
Winslow Circle. Winslow Circle. There you go.
north
So, so everyone's talking about the same part when we delve into the actual location of the structure and what is entailed with that. So I wanted to make those few points. I mean, the question is going to keep coming down to Section 7C3 of the legislation, which is a certificate of appropriateness for demolition, removal, or relocation of a local landmark shall only be approved if the commission determines that the applicant has established a hardship, not today's conversation, or if written reports from the building department and or other licensed engineers or architects with experience in rehabilitation or reuse of historic structures have determined that the landmark presents an imminent and unavoidable threat to the public health, safety, and welfare. I think that's the heart of our issue, and I think that's the question that we come out and ask. Whether we do it now or after the public hearing begins.
Well, I don't think they've finished their presentation
Oh.
yet. I think the second
Okay.
part's going to be the engineer telling you
Thank you.
how
Okay,
to comply with the 7 paragraph.
let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Peter from Pantech Engineering. I was hired to inspect the structural components of the home. The home at 230 White Plains Road structure has been modified several times over the course of its life, and there are no public records of these structural changes. The main stair leading to the second floor has been relocated, requiring reframing of the existing floor joists for the new opening. One of the two main original chimneys was relocated and positioned in the same plane as an interior load-bearing wall. Header beams needed to be installed around the chimney to pick up floor joists that were being supported on that portion of the load-bearing wall. Composition of new masonry for relocated chimney and new foundation are unknown. New large multi-stall bathrooms have been added throughout the home, requiring notching, cutting of existing wood beams, and reducing their capacity. The entire new layer of attic floor framing has been constructed over the top of the existing joist beams, and the full makeover of this new raised framing is unknown. The major concerns that I witnessed was the home's two main interior load-bearing walls have visibly deflected and are being shored up with temporary posts. These are not intended to be a permanent solution. Foundation is experiencing water infiltration issues throughout, including all the interior walls and several exterior foundation walls. Several foundation elements were observed to have shifted, and inserted locations are insufficiently supporting structure above. Visible framing in the cellar is in poor condition throughout, which will require extensive repair or replacement. Damaged columns were observed at attic level. There's a column that is rotated and another that is splitting down the middle. Existing wood beams were observed to have plumbing lines drilled through them in multiple locations. It's suspected that this is the case in many other locations that are not visible due to the multi-toilet bathrooms installed throughout the home. The ground floor framing above the inaccessible crawl space was observed to be improperly supported in multiple locations. Further investigation would be required to fully do a full analysis. In addition, there are a multiple of other structural deficiencies requiring repair needed throughout the home that are less concerning, but would definitely need to be addressed at some point. So due to the large number of modifications made over the years, even the 12 probes done, a full picture of the structural layout of the home could not be determined. The 12 probes uncovered a multitude of deficiencies, and more probing would most likely uncover more conditions requiring repair. Inspection of the cellar framing and 12 probes uncovered 42 separate deficiencies in the interior of the structure. Approximately 15 deficiencies were observed at the exterior of the structure and surrounding grounds. Additional extensive probing / demo would be required to get an overall picture of the structure, to inspect unpermitted structural work, and to further inspect deficiencies observed. And then I kind of get into the economic, to further inspect, analyze, and design repairs for each deficiency, it would take at least 5 times the engineering costs as it would take to design the structure, a new structure, but I guess that's not what we're talking about today. So yeah, that's everything I have to say. But the 2 major points is the 2 interior load-bearing walls are definitely deflecting. They're resting on these beams in the cellar that are in very poor condition. And there's definitely a lot of foundation issues that I saw that were quite worrying.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think this is getting us to where we need to go, which is a discussion about the state of the structure at 230 White Plains Road, addressing some of the points that you have brought up. So with that as our plan, we can ask questions now, or we can open up the public hearing to do that.
Lee, are you done? Is that your presentation? Is that all the speakers? Okay, so yeah, you can feel free to ask questions, or if you would like to open the public hearing, that's your other option.
I actually do have a question. If you could just talk a little bit about, we talked about words like damage and poor versus imminent danger. So again, it was a wonderful comprehensive report, and I made my way through it, but you've identified the two, the posts. Is that what we're talking about when you're saying imminent danger versus poor, or, you know, there are a lot of words that we've talked about tonight, poor and deficient, but I just am trying to wrap my head around poor and deficient versus imminent danger. So could you just speak to those posts a bit, and is that what we're talking about?
Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
I'll turn it over to Peter to fully answer it, since he's the engineer, not me. But I'll just say at the outset, what he was referring to and what we're really talking about is that everything in his report, the damage is so extensive that it's really what we would hope your board would see, a wholesome look at this entire house, that it is so beyond repair and so extensive that it's effectively a loss. And so your question is, well, is it a danger? I think Peter's going to say yes. Those are the two big issues he highlighted. Those are the big structural issues. But it's impossible to know, is the house going to fall down on somebody? Without that's impossible to know, right? There could be an earthquake tomorrow and it could fall down. There was an earthquake last week in Westchester. So we can't say for certainty exactly when that's going to happen. But what we can say is that these structural issues are so severe that they pose a significant threat and a danger to anyone who's in the house. And furthermore, to fully understand how severe and how extensive this damage is, we need to do demolition in itself to actually blow out the interior and see where else is there damage. So I'll turn it back to Peter to explain the details of that a little bit more, but I just wanted to highlight that for your board.
Again, you know, with this house, with all the modifications, it's kind of hard to tell, you know, what members are being supported by other members. But I could say for sure those two, the load-bearing walls, the two interior ones, go, you know, extend all the way to the attic. And right now you have these two beams in the basement that are supporting each of the walls, and they haven't been repaired or done anything to them, and they're definitely deteriorating. And somebody just stuck a few poles underneath without, you know, any kind of engineer being involved. I'm sure somebody just was like, oh, this is deflecting, and you could see the deflection in the upper floor. But yeah, the repair was definitely not done by an engineer. It was just somebody, you know, went to Home Depot and grabbed like a post or two and put it under each one. So due to the unknowns, all the unknowns and in the structure, I couldn't say that this is safe.
Okay, thank you. I just thought that would be helpful too for everyone listening that doesn't have the expertise that you do. So thank you very much for that.
So I did hear the term beyond repair. I think it's worth noting that for any local landmark in Tuckahoe, it is the responsibility of the property owner to maintain the building. What we are talking about here tonight is that it's so far gone at this point in time, as perhaps can be proven, that it poses an imminent, and the next word is pretty important, unavoidable threat to the public health, the safety, and welfare. So I think it's an old house. It's an old house. I've been in it. It's going to need some work. Old houses do. I don't think that's what we're talking about. What we're talking about is what you were alluding to, I believe, this question of, is it falling down today? And if it is there anything that can be done to prevent it from falling down, are the questions that are coming to my mind. And I think that's what we really need to take a good hard look at. Because nobody wants anybody getting hurt or anything to be damaged in this situation. But I think we need to keep coming back to, is it an imminent and unavoidable threat? We've got beams, we've got posts. Can those be reinforced? I mean, we can go, and the report that was presented for the Certificate of Appropriateness application was extensive. There were a lot of color photos in there, and we were able to get a decent look at some of the interior of the house. And we can see that there are instances in which the question can be raised. Can this be fixed? Can something be put in to stabilize it, to keep it from falling down? These are the questions that I keep coming back to when we're looking at the question before us, which is, does it pose an imminent, unavoidable threat?
So currently, as Peter mentioned, in the basement there are temporary posts that were installed beneath those deflecting beams, which are creating deflection and failure conditions throughout the upper floors. So if those were removed, then yes, it is an absolute imminent threat. The exterior of the house on the western side is actually twisting, and if you look at it closely, you can see that. I believe that's also occurring on the north side of the house as well. So the house, as it's been deflecting, has also twisted, creating other structural issues and separations in the structure.
Thank you. I think you said that something's down there at that lower level that shouldn't be removed. I don't think it should therefore be removed. If it would, removing so would compromise and create an imminent threat. So I don't think that's what you're suggesting. But what I'm trying to understand is, I'm sure things have been patched up over the years. We know that Concordia left the university as well as his house for perhaps some financial reasons that leaves us in this situation now. But that support is there now. So
Temporary supports, yes. So to rectify the issue, if it could be rectified, a very careful approach would have to be put in place to remove those and then shore that up temporarily, which goes back to what I was saying before. In order to fully assess the structure, we're looking at an extensive and an extreme cost to get to point A, which is a full assessment with all the finishes removed. Because those have been deflecting for years, right? And the structure above has been impacted negatively by that for years. So the way the house is framed, it's not framed like like how it is conventionally done today. Those framing members go from the top of the foundation all the way up to the roof. So if those have been impacted, they have to, this substantial demolition, almost demolishing the entire house except for the studs to get to that point in order for it to be replaced.
So I think what I'm hearing is it's been stabilized. In whatever way was done,
To prevent imminent,
it has been stabilized.
to prevent imminent failure.
It has been stabilized to prevent imminent failure. I'm not denying that money would be required to get this house to where you want it to be. But that's, again, not the discussion right now. So the house it's been stabilized. I can only imagine. There were people living in there up until a couple years ago. Doesn't mean necessarily a proof right there, but it has been stabilized. Okay, well, I hope that you will stay because I'm sure people want to ask perhaps some other questions.
Again, just
Yeah.
to be clear, and any questions that the public have should be directed at the board, not to. Sorry, all right. Any questions that the public has need to be addressed to the board, and then the board, if they have questions, they can reflect it back to the applicant. And I need to move the easel because I can't see Peggy.
Oh. Yeah, well, we can't have that.
As long as you can hear me.
Okay, well, the questioning can and should continue, and I think it's fair to include the voices of others, and we can still ask questions up here from the board. But in order to open that public meeting in which individuals from the public will be invited to contribute, we first need, as a board, to vote on that. So, do I have a motion to open a public hearing to consider the Certificate of Appropriateness application for 230 White Plains Road, also known as the Ward House?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, so our public hearing is now open. And as we have been instructed, we'll ask everyone to please direct your comments to the commission. The commission can then turn them back to whomever may be the best to respond to them. I would again like to mention that we're discussing the Certificate of Appropriateness application for the demolition of the Ward House. The historical and architectural significance of the Ward House has already been determined and decided. It is a Tuckahoe local landmark. So with that as our guide, anyone is welcome to come up. So I ask that you please say your name. We used to do addresses, say name and address. If you could do your name and your address for the record, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Stephen Tilley Architect, which is located at 22 Elm Street in Dobbs Ferry, New York. I'm the principal of an architectural firm named Stephen Tilley Architect. I'm here with my preservation director, Stephanie Reinhardt, and I guess you'd say, Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm going to thank you for your service in the cause of preservation, and it's great to see everyone here interested in the cause of preservation. I'd have to say that I'm kind of the veteran of many campaigns and have seen a lot of structures that other people might think were in imminent danger of collapse, which we have successfully restored to use for a variety of uses. I've had the opportunity to review the submission by the applicant and the detailed and extensive report by Pantech Engineering. I think my credentials have been submitted separately, but I'll just mention a couple of buildings, including 18th century timber frame structures that we've worked on and won awards for the restoration of the Onderdonk Tallman Budkey House in Clarkstown, New York, which we recently completed. And we are currently restoring the Odell Rochambeau House in the town of Greenberg, not far from here, for use as an historic museum. That building was in substantially worse condition than the Ward House, than 230 White Plains Road. I've been hired by, retained by the Friends of the Ward House to review these materials, I have to note at the beginning. I also should note that I was not able to visit the interior of the building, so I'm relying on the Pantech review to determine any, my comments based on its condition. So I'll note that 12 probes were made ostensibly to investigate the structural integrity of the house. In a listed structure, and it is listed locally, but it's also been determined, I should note, by the Office of State Parks and Historic Preservation, to be eligible for listing on the state and national registers under criterion B for its association with Stephen Ward, and also under criterion C in the area of architecture as a significant local example of colonial and Greek revival styles. When we work on a listed structure like this, best practices emphasize non-destructive investigations. And there are lots of tools that we have, including 2D and 3D laser scanning, which actually can definitively determine whether there's any distortion or creep in the structure. There has to be distortion and creep in an 18th century structure over time. It starts happening right away. We also have infrared scanning, borescope investigations, sort of like laparoscopic surgery rather than opening the chest cavity. However, we only do destructive exposures or probes if we see a pathology and we want to investigate it. It's really not a good way of determining what the structure is. There are other ways of doing that based on experience and also this other non-destructive scanning. I think, therefore, that while the probes were excessive and probably did some damage to historic fabric, they did have the benefit, for those of us unable to see the structure, of revealing the intact surviving condition of the 18th century timber frame. The probes, as Mr. Panagopoulos notes, also tell the story of the evolution of the building over time. The State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO, supports the preservation of the continuum of use rather than restoration to some, quote, original condition. The principle that is there a period of history that's a lot more important than some other period of history? Things that happen to buildings over its lifetime are part of the history of the building. History is an accumulation. And this accumulation goes back centuries. The changes which have been noted are interesting. They're part of the story. And rather than a defect, as the thrust of the applicant's submission seems to suggest, the retention and explanation of adaptations to changing uses is a positive condition. The conditions noted in the Pantech report are consistent with the era of construction and subsequent uses and modifications over time. By comparison to the Odell House, as I mentioned, the Ward House is essentially intact and needs what I would characterize in my practice as normal repairs rather than exceptional measures. I see the deficiencies noted as a catalog similar to what you get when you do an inspection before buying a house or have an inspection done. You get a catalog of the paint's peeling, there may be asbestos around the pipes in the basement, things that either you're going to have to address as the purchaser or you'll have a negotiation about who takes care of it. So the primary conditions that were just referred to, which are the temporary columns in the basement, are relatively easily taken care of. You make appropriate footings, do a structural model, make the appropriate footings, size the columns correctly, and we've done this in many buildings to create support for a beam that has crept. Creeping, which is the movement of molecules inside a timber, happen over time and get to a stable deflected condition so that jacking abruptly is a dangerous activity in an old timber building. You need to move very slowly and carefully and cautiously. The cover letter suggests that the property's historical significance, if any, I would consider that comment gratuitous, is now unrecognizable. Well, it's completely recognizable. To review, the Ward House is located at an intersection that dates to the early part of the 18th century. The earliest and larger portion of the house is a timber frame colonial house constructed before 1797 to replace an earlier house burned by British forces in 1778. A secondary wing in the Greek Revival style was constructed in the 1950s under Concordia College ownership, and the house served as a residence, tavern, post office, stagecoach stop, and most recently, yes, a women's dormitory. While the architectural style and exterior details of the house have remained consistent and appropriate over the last 2 centuries, the various uses reflect the growth of and changes to the neighborhood. It's a great story. It's a wonderful accumulating story. And the building is evidence of that story and contains evidence. Nothing described, depicted, mentioned, or suggested as a deficiency in the submission would impact the building's status as a state, national, or local historic landmark. Again, nothing mentioned in this report would impact its status. The exterior is wonderful. The house retains the rich exterior ornamentation of an important 18th century Georgian building. In other words, you go to normal, kind of background 18th century buildings, you don't see this apparatus. You don't see the amount of novelty and workmanship that went into this building. It reflects money, it reflects status, and it reflects importance. You have paneled friezes with elaborate scrolled and filleted brackets, labeled and punched windows with hoods, shutters, beaded fasciae, crown molded cornices, rake moldings, paneled corner pilasters. The investigation showed us the siding, the survival of siding material under the vinyl siding, which does not diminish the building's integrity or historic status. We have often, been happy to see that asbestos siding or aluminum siding or now vinyl siding has actually provided some protection for historic siding that we find underneath. And there are teams in cities in Illinois who go around with removing the Tin Man work and discovering the history underneath. So the basic regime, the Georgian regime, and as you note, the front was facing north where the porch is, survives. No evidence in the submission supports, in my opinion, the unconditional conclusion that the building is, quote, unsafe to inhabit, as the introductory letter by Zarin and Steinmetz suggests. There is no conclusion to that effect in the assessment. And by my own review of the visual evidence and exterior of the condition yields no support at all for that conclusion. There is no evidence for the assertion in the cover letter that the property is in such a state of disrepair that the replacement of the structure is the only feasible method of ensuring the health, safety, and welfare of the occupants while returning the property back to its traditional use. If the evidence presented was the standard for demolition and replacement, then I would suggest that the houses of many of my neighbors, and maybe some of those in the room today, would need to be subject to demolition and replacement. The proposal to demolish and replace has no merit, in my opinion. repairs and maintenance are required for buildings of any era, including those that have a pedigree stretching back to the 18th century. Timber frame structures, and I want to thank the probes for showing us that the timber frame connections, many of them are intact. There is normal checking. The holes that were drilled by plumbers, who are indeed the enemy of structure, are at least in reasonable places, and those members are supported, as the photographs show. And so we're not seeing the kind of any evidence of imminent failure. Timber frame structures need to be understood before they're modified. But I submit that the evidence submitted suggests that the original timber frame survives and has not been compromised, essentially. If this were a pre-purchase inspection, which it closely resembles, I would say yes, put some money in a reserve fund, but buy this distinctive or historic structure and enjoy it. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's my statement.
So if I could, before you go, thank you for your report, but can I ask you a question? If you could come up, and others may have questions, and thank you to everyone for sticking around as questions may come up. But I think towards the end of your presentation, it sounded pretty clear that from what you've observed through the reports that were submitted in this application, that there is not enough information to determine that there is an imminent and unavoidable threat to the health, safety, and welfare of the surrounding area.
Absolutely not. I mean, having worked on many structures in much worse condition or inspected and done condition reports, that's my professional opinion that there is no imminent danger in this building.
So I was asking before, I was using this term stabilized. I mean, the house appears, from what you've been able to tell, the house appears stable.
To the extent that I've been able to determine from the material presented and from the exterior of the building, that's correct, yeah.
So back to that imminent and unavoidable, if something were to jump out from these photos and pages as being pretty bad, really bad, it could be addressed. It sounds like to make it not so unavoidable.
Yeah, absolutely. There's temporary shoring has been done. Obviously, that's a strategy that can be used while you're effecting additional repairs. That's exactly what we did at the Odell house, which did not show well, I should say. And we have temporarily shored it, and we're now about to replace the temporary shoring with permanent structural attachments.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe that people can come up as they choose in whatever order works organically here. Thank you.
Hi. Is it work? Yeah, it's working. John Wilson, 14 Henry Street, Tuckahoe. I'm just wondering, in the normal course of purchasing property, one has to have an inspection of the property. I'm wondering if that actually occurred when this property was purchased. Because if it was or wasn't, none of this could be new news, I would imagine, in terms of the state of the structure. That's just my question.
Thank you. The question was whether or not an inspection was done when 230 White Plains Road was purchased by the current owner. I can't say that I have seen personally any inspection reports. I don't know if anyone from the team wants to speak to that.
Sal Provenzano, 11 River Street, president of Friends of the Ward House. I'm going to, first of all, I want to make a comment to Commissioner Luisi. During the last meeting, Commissioner, you said, come out and show support. So what do you think? You think we have enough support here? Thank you. You inspired all of us, okay? So the first question that I have now I'm going to direct to our chairperson, Steinhagen. You are in receipt of Stephen Tilley's report, which I forwarded to you, and I also forwarded to the developer's attorney as well. You've had now at least the weekend to look it over and look over his comments within it. I'm going to direct this question directly to Commissioner Castellanos. Commissioner, you are an architect by education, correct? And you had a chance to look at the Certificate of Appropriateness application, and you also had a chance to look at Stephen Tilley's response. In your estimation, as a licensed architect, is this building in danger of falling down?
No, it is not.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Another thing is that I studied the Certificate of Appropriateness application and the supporting documentation. I did not see a plan for a replacement house. This almost seems like that this is above and beyond the scope of tonight's meeting. It seems like the developer's kind of ahead of himself. My understanding is, and I will read chapter and verse of the law slowly so that everyone it can sink in. But I'm not going to read all 11 pages, okay? Section 7, Certificate of Appropriateness for local landmarks or historic districts. Criteria for issuing a Certificate of Appropriateness, which Commissioner Steinhagen went over. My understanding is the only thing that we are focusing on tonight in this meeting is demolition, removal, or relocation. A Certificate of Appropriateness for demolition, removal, or relocation of a local landmark shall only be approved if the Commission determines that the applicant has established a hardship or written reports from the building department and/or licensed engineers or architects, and here's my emphasis, with experience in rehabilitation or reuse of historic structures, have determined that the landmark presents an imminent danger, an imminent and unavoidable threat to public safety, health, and welfare. I ask the board collectively, the commissioners, in your estimation, does this meet that criteria for demolition?
So this is the big important question that we are discussing. Yes.
The judge here,
Yes.
and you're going to take all the information. You haven't heard everything.
Yep.
So before I think you can answer that question, you probably need to wait.
I think that's fair. I think that's the whole point of the public hearing, is to gather as much information as possible for this commission to make the best, most informed choice that we possibly can.
Oh, and that's fine. And another question, and I'm going to direct this, if I have to direct it to you, to our village attorney. I know that there is a lawsuit pending, an Article 78. I know it very well because we were named in that lawsuit as well. The Friends of the Ward House was named in the lawsuit, and we've had to defend ourselves with that lawsuit. My question is the law still intact? Is it still enforced? Is it still a law?
Is what still a law?
The Tuckahoe Landmark Preservation Law, is it
Well,
still?
that's not being challenged, so that is law. That is
Okay,
the law.
so the reality is we have a law that's on the books. We have a Certificate of Appropriateness that is being looked at strictly for the demolition, and this is really the scope of this meeting unless I don't understand.
100%. It's
Okay.
the scope of the meeting. It's a very narrow issue tonight.
Perfect. That's why I was a little confused when I saw plans for a new house. I wasn't expecting that. Okay?
It is in the report from Zarin and Steinmetz that they were proposing a replacement.
Excuse me?
It is in the report, the original Certificate of Appropriateness application submission from Zarin and Steinmetz, that they did suggest a proposal.
Oh, they did. Okay. But it wasn't included in the application.
I'm looking at it.
I didn't.
Here.
I didn't see.
I
any,
see
I
it.
didn't see any house. In
I
the
see it. I
application.
mean, I have a lot of pages
Okay,
here.
That's fine. We'll deal with that.
But I was made aware of the
Okay.
suggestion.
So the only other thing that I want to say is that this tremendous support that we have here is testament to the importance of this issue. And I'm just going to throw three numbers out at everybody just to think about. First is a number 3. The second number is 5,800. The third number is $185 million. So how do those three numbers work together? There's 3 school districts. Eastchester, Bronxville, and Tuckahoe represents 5,800 students. The combined annual budgets for those 3 is $185 million. Now, am I suggesting that the school district buys the house? No. There's got to be a way that we can preserve this house. But what I'm saying is we've got living history that's there at the top of Winter Hill Road and Route 22. Not only the house, but there's the yard next to it that has been untouched for 300 years. Oh, we also have a little school called Iona University down the road, and the Chapel School, and the Immaculate Conception School, and St. Joseph School. Didn't even count those in the 5,800. So what I'm saying is, my plea is for the community, for our municipal leaders, and for all of us to get together and find a way to solve this. And it's not by now. We're not going to save this by demolishing it. That's a great argument that I really can't understand. We cannot demolish this structure because it's really for our children, our children's children, and their children. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Deirdre Rylander, and I'm actually here from across the river from Yonkers and Bronxville, and I'm the former president of the Yonkers Historical Society. Just wanted to come to show my support. We have gone through many landmarking battles in Yonkers. Anyone who's familiar with Yonkers, we've had a landmarks preservation statute on the books since the Carnegie Library was demolished in 1980 or 81. And we currently are the custodians of the historic Sherwood House on Tuckahoe Road, which dates from 1740. I found it very interesting. There was discussion of wall deflection. We dealt with that issue in our historic tenant farmhouse not 2 years ago. We had wonderful engineers. We had a wonderful company that was very skilled in historic structures. They were able to stabilize the original 1740 beams that were, some of them were rotted because there was water damage. And they sistered them, and they followed the SHPO guidelines to make sure that all the historic fabric that still was intact was preserved. I thank Steve Tilley, who has also done quite a bit in Yonkers and gave a wonderful presentation, and I wish you luck, and we will be following closely, and we are here to support you. So, wonderful job. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Marian Schaefer. I live at 28 Grove Lane in Bronxville, New York. I'm currently a junior at Bronxville High School, and I have been doing an independent research study on the Ward House as well as divided loyalties in this area since the beginning of my sophomore year. I have watched as the movement of the Ward House has grown and developed. It has completely engaged me, and not just me, but friends, community members, family, fellow students, and my 3 younger brothers. I recently presented to the 4th grade classes on the divided loyalties in Westchester during the Revolution, and I included the Ward House in my presentation. The 4th graders were extremely excited to learn about the Ward House, and they were so excited when I showed them pictures and maps and realized that this house they drove by every day had such significance in the community. Local history is not targeted in our curriculums, and we need physical reminders. I'm not here to talk about the architecture or the rebuilding, but if this building is repairable, we should make it a priority to fix it. I know a lot of students of all ages that would love to get involved in this movement, and there's been a growing interest in this movement at Bronxville High School, as well as in the middle school and elementary school. Thank you.
Super. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing those words and for the work that you're doing to promote local history.
Good evening, everyone on the panel. Thank you so much for spending your time and your expertise, and also respectful good evening to everyone here in the public, and thank you for coming out. My name is Maria Grillo. My husband and I, Michael Grillo, aka George Washington, we live here in the neighborhood at 9 Shady Lane, and incidentally, our house also happens to be a wood timber frame with clapboard siding. We love it. But it's significantly younger than the house in question. As I'm listening to the proceedings, I had the same exact question that Madam Chairperson had. Is this an imminent danger to anybody's life? And if it were, honestly, I'd be the first one to say, take it down, because you don't want to have an accident or, God forbid, cost somebody's life. But the proceedings and information I've heard, especially from the gentleman here, from Historic Preservation, I'm familiar, and my husband and I, we are very familiar with a lot of these historic homes. We've seen the work, we've seen the age, we've seen the damage, we've also seen the stories and the character. And it would be a shame to simply go right in without any close examination, as he's describing, to simply throw the baby out with the bathwater. That fact would concern me a lot. I would feel, honestly, if we didn't make every effort, like the young lady had mentioned, to save the house, or to at least give it the dignity to look at it structurally, deepen its bones, the way he's saying, with lasers and tools that only a good architect from historic viewpoint can see from experience, then I would feel like you're stealing something from the community. This is a house and the history that belongs to you. And again, thank you for coming out and spending your time and listening to everybody's opinion and everybody's information. It's a group effort. I will tell you from experience, I've lived and studied in the UK for a number of years. By education, I'm a school teacher for over 25 years. My specialty is English language and literature and history. So is my husband, George. That's kind of how we met. But I can tell you from having toured the UK and actually being to many of these historic homes, from palaces that date back to the Tudor era and Elizabeth I, to Buckingham Palace, to Sandringham, all of these historic homes are individual gems. You will never see another one ever like it again. The knowledge and this craftsmanship that have gone into these buildings have not only withstood the test of time, but these secrets have been lost over the ages. It's something that would be almost impossible to duplicate. And I heard it from both architects, the gentleman here and Mr. Chairman, architect by trade. You both mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, you both mentioned that this, thankfully, is not an imminent danger of costing somebody life or limb. To me, and the question that you mentioned, and then your professional opinions, is really all I needed to hear. I think we owe it to the house and to the people in the community to look at this a little bit more closely and not just be so quick to dismiss it. I think that we owe the house a lot more than that. That's my opinion. My husband and I have seen so many reenactments and so many homes that they're not making any more of these. Whether it be Tudor, whether it be Georgian, whether it be Victorian, you have a unique treasure on your hands, and it would be a crime to throw it away. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't want to overstay my welcome, but being not from Tuckahoe, being from England and growing up in a village that had 11th century, 15th century, 17th century buildings that we grew up with, that were preserved from the 1100s. The reason I'm here is because I hate to see something of such historical significance being destroyed. You know, if you look at Boston and Newport, Rhode Island, they've done a much better job than New York has generally in preserving its colonial history. And you know, this is one of the last few examples of that history with such an amazing story around it. Even some of my fellow countrymen, I think, resided there. General Howe's headquarters, for example. But I think in general, this is something that we should all try and preserve this history. It's a story. It tells a story about the area. It tells a story about America, a much, much bigger story. And I just, you know, I personally would just hate to see that destroyed, you know, given the privilege I've had of growing up in a country that preserves its history so well. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michael Collins. I reside at 21 Winslow Circle. And I've lived there for, I guess it'll be 28 years coming up this October. So I haven't followed this situation that closely, and so some of this information is new to me. I want to say off the bat, I am an unabashed capitalist. I believe in private property. And if the developer actually bought the property and then it was landmarked afterward and he had absolutely no knowledge that that was coming down the pike, that is something that should be taken into account. I do understand that's not the purpose of tonight's hearing. So what I've heard thus far, and I want you to sort of perhaps focus on, is if the standard is imminent danger or an imminent threat, it sounds, from what I've heard, like that's not been proven by the evidence that they've demonstrated. And so the question really is it going to be too costly for the developer, in his estimation, to try to improve the house, because I think they have the right to sort of do internally what they want to do, and he's saying it's going to be too expensive, but that's really the second step. Is that what you've said, Madam Chairman?
Yes, thank you. In our legislation, in Section 9, it goes into detail about the hardship claim, and there are a number of steps involved with that, but it does exist because of situations where money is the factor. Right here, you mentioned that that is not the discussion this evening, but it's a reality when working with older buildings. So it's absolutely acknowledged by this commission and by the legislation.
So I guess my question then is, the only determination that you're trying to make tonight is whether or not there's an imminent threat or danger to the public? Is that?
Right, so 230 White Plains Road, it was landmarked. A landmark structure cannot be demolished unless hardship or it poses an imminent and unavoidable threat to the health, safety, and welfare of the area. That needs to be in there. That we need that. You just for emergency situations. But you're correct. That's the question we're trying to answer.
And just to, and I don't want to appear obtuse, but the hardship question doesn't even emerge until you make it. Is that, or is it sort of? Maybe this is something best addressed to the attorney.
Yeah, so it's all in our law. This first step is what they're going through is this health, safety to the public. What happens is, as the chair, as Madam Chairman said, paragraph 9, I'll read it real quick. It's part of it. It says, an applicant whose certificate of appropriateness for proposed demolition, removal, relocation, or alteration of landmark resource or property has been denied may apply for relief on the grounds of economic hardship. So if they deny it, this part, then the applicant can come back and say, okay, now there's an economic hardship here.
Okay.
So we're really just dealing with the safety issue tonight, very narrow. And if that's denied, then they can go for hardship. If it's approved, then it's over.
Okay. So I guess to just, close up, I feel for the developer if in fact, it was a purchase and then it was landmarked after the fact. If that were me, I would feel that that was unfair and improper. But, I think that's not what's being debated here. I understand that there's a lawsuit. Maybe that's part of what's being addressed in the Article 78.
But based on what I've heard, it doesn't sound like they're going to be able to meet the standard for an imminent threat. I guess the last thing that I'll say is, and maybe this is getting ahead of ourselves, to the extent that there's going to be anything done, maybe some people want to just see the building sort of left as is and say the public should purchase this or whatever. I'm not going to take in opinion on that, but as somebody who lives within visual distance of the property, to me, preserving sort of the character of what's there and not changing the neighborhood is really the primary focus. And I will admit that that is a absolutely parochial and personal interest, since I live down the block, rather than sort of a great interest in sort of historical preservation. So thank you for all your time and attention, and thank you for the presentations and the information. I think was very informative.
Thank you. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Edward Powers, and I live at 6 McKinley Street, Bronxville/Tuckahoe, New York. I want to thank Madam Chair and members of the committee this opportunity for me to speak. I'm speaking against the demolition of the Ward House. I've been a member of this community since 1972, when I was honorably discharged from the Army as a major. I still own that house, and the house at 6 McKinley I bought in 2003 from Elizabeth Betts Leckie, who happens to be in this room, who was the Tuckahoe historian, and I think her grandfather was actually the mayor of Tuckahoe. Anyhow, my point is that not only the house, but the area is a historic area. And when the Elizabeth Betts Leckie's uncle was developing the property next to the house that I live in, they discovered a 20-pound British cannonball, okay? And she gave this as a gift to the Westchester Historical Association. So not only is this house significant in terms of Bronxville, Tuckahoe, Eastchester, and Westchester, but it's significant in terms of the history of the United States, okay? And to see that house demolished would be a tremendous tragedy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for all that you're doing. I'm Lissa Halen. I live at 14 Scarsdale Avenue in Eastchester. I've been the curator of the Marble Schoolhouse for quite a while now, and I'm here to talk about all that the community does. The Marble Schoolhouse was going to be knocked down. Now, it didn't have the structural issues, but the point is that the community came around, and the town actually owns it. We have a 99-year lease on it, but the town owns it. But we have been the foremost and longest serving promoters and preservers of the history of our town. And we love that all of these other groups are coming in, and all of you tonight are helping us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me properly? Thanks. I'm Elizabeth Leckie, whom Dr. Powers just introduced you to, and I live at 521 State Route 9H in Hudson, New York. But I did live at 6 McKinley Street from the time I was born until 20 years ago, when we sold the house to Dr. Powers. I'm here to ask a question, though. I believe that the Ward House was on a list of historically significant buildings that had been drawn up by the village a number of years before the landmark legislation was actually put into effect, and that every building on that list was protected under a moratorium. So at the time that Mr. Holcomb bought the house, was he aware of the moratorium? Because that certainly, I think, is important to understand whether or not, especially if the hardship case comes up in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
That was
pre this board. I don't know the exact timing when the moratorium, whether
I'm trying to remember. Yeah.
the developer purchased it before or after the moratorium went
Yep.
into effect. It's probably right around that area, right around that time. So I just don't know, timing wise.
Right, the moratorium was put in place before the legislation was approved. One quick comment about that too. Tuckahoe has another historic landmark that was recently added to its inventory. The owner of that building didn't see it coming either, not to put it in those terms, but you could look at every potential landmark on our list and argue that they were purchased not knowing they would be on a list. So that's a historic preservation issue that comes up all the time, so I just wanted to knock that one out briefly. You wanted to say something?
Yes, Sal Provenzano again, 11 River Street. Regarding the moratorium was in place in August of 2021, and the house was purchased on September 1st of 2021. So the reality is, and the listing, the MLS listing for that house says historic structure in the MLS listing. So that Mr. Holcomb didn't know that he was purchasing a house that was under a moratorium at that point. And there was, in Village Hall meetings, the talk of legislation for landmarking. It's kind of a head scratcher, because the reality is that you should be doing your due diligence before you buy something to make sure that it is what you think it is. And the reality is that the moratorium was in place before that house closed on September 1st, 2021. That's a point of fact. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tuckahoe had created a historic preservation task force months before that. The potential list of structures for landmark consideration was posted on the Tuckahoe.com website months before the house was purchased as well. Hi.
Hi, Hi, my name is Jack Flannery. I live at 77 Tuckahoe Avenue in Eastchester, New York. I actually have been a member of the Eastchester Historical Society since 4th grade, where I met many of you in this room. And as part of the curriculum, as you'd want to say, for that local history camp, was going to the Ward House itself. Because Eastchester, as I'm sure many of you know, or if you don't, you ought to, Eastchester was at the crossroads of history. The Battle of White Plains was a massive turning point, and it was fought all up and down Route 22. In fact, with you, Jeannie, we played the Crawfords, who were killed outside of that house by the British because he was a patriot, and his father, I believe, Stephen Ward, was a loyalist, which is why the Ward House is one of only 2 houses in Eastchester left from before the Revolution. The British, no offense, had the wherewithal to burn everything except the loyalist mayor and the shroudmaker's house, who made clothes for dead people. So, but the Ward House as part of that is really essential. And one thing I think the salient issue obviously is whether it presents an imminent threat to public safety, which, as our architect with experience in historical homes stated clearly, it does not. I think that's what has been established here. But beyond that, the history of it, I think, is worth considering, and in fact why on a Tuesday night we have a packed auditorium here. And that's what I would like to say. I don't think that reasonable cause has been made for it not being, posing an imminent threat to the public, and I'll finish with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to add one more thing. I thought that it was a bit strange that the developer's presentation tried to make the point that the historical value and the aesthetic value no longer existed as part of this law. I think that those are both clearly the case. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bob Foyce, 105 Garth Road. I am so glad that we do have legislation in place to protect such an important place like the Ward House. I mean, I can remember when they tore down the Scarsdale Plaza, which is nowhere near as historically important, but it was a wrap and wrap architectural gem, and it was razed to the ground. We didn't have any protection of that. And we had the problem that if we tried to turn it into an independent theater, what would it cost? Would we end up splitting up the theater? Would we ruin the architectural integrity of the location? Now, it's not the same thing what we're talking about here, but you do wrestle with that. And but I'm a little bit confused by the presentation I listened to here about the imminent danger. I mean, this is not the Wizard of Oz here. This property is not going to twist and turn and suddenly land in Bronxville Manor and cause havoc across the town. I mean, in all frankness, if it is as in danger as they claim, shouldn't there have been an inspection done during the after the bankruptcy proceeding, whereby just to maintain the integrity of the exterior, that there was a remedy put forth where the owner of the building had to make sure that the integrity of the building was maintained? I mean, is this an out there question? Since they're making the argument that there is damage, are they also making the argument that they have to make sure they maintain the building?
So if I understand your question correctly, the Tuckahoe legislation absolutely requires that property owners of homes and also of landmarks need to keep their buildings in decent enough shape so that it doesn't pose an imminent and unavoidable threat to the neighbors or the surrounding area. Right. So that absolutely applies to this. And the protections are even stronger for landmarks. So they need to make sure that the interior doesn't compromise the exterior. So you're getting at the heart of what we're asking as well, which is, are we seeing anything that is illustrating this potential for imminent and unavoidable consequences?
Now, I was raised with relatives who were home builders, and they used to renovate a lot of buildings. And in all fairness, at least up in Poughkeepsie or Red Hook or Hyde Park, up in Dutchess County, you tinker a bit with what you do to an old house. And to be fair, I'm sure there's going to be remedies here. He's an owner of a home. This is his house. This is his property. He's a taxpayer. I'm sure there's something. Is there any guidance that the owner is being given on what he can do, what he should do, what he possibly could do, rather than just leave it open-ended? Because I think that's part of the confusion here.
So that's a good question that can be looked at from multiple angles. The commission right now is tasked with looking at how can this commission assist with changes to the exterior, which is the whole reason for having a certificate of appropriateness application and a certificate of appropriateness meeting. In this case, it wasn't a certificate of appropriateness for doing something to the exterior that would make a lot of these problems go away. Right. Rather, it went straight to, it has to be demolished. Right, right. So there's absolutely a process in place, as there should be, for supporting and helping and having meetings and input into decision making regarding the structures. Yes.
But to speak to what Stephen Tilley said about the continuum of the historical preservation, and the fact this building hadn't burnt down and was rebuilt, and buildings do get changed over the years. All right, I would hope that there is within. We have to listen. You know, we do not want another building or another open space in town taken away and the aesthetic ruined. And we do not want a historical treasure taken away like this. It's too important. It's one of the few in this part of the country. But I'm sure and I hope that there's something that can be worked out with the owner of the building whereby it can be preserved and it can be viable for many purposes. Especially as you're talking about the exterior and what can be done and finding ways to work with what's there. That's what I'm thinking. I mean,
absolutely. And the commission has said at other meetings, but it's worth saying again that we have built into our legislation our interest and ability in assisting landmark owners in applying for grants, for example, in moving forward with award application that can result in support. We have built that in and stand at the ready to help any and all landmark owners in any way that we can. If you're asking how we can actually do that, it's a conversation that is.
Because my observation, I'd love to see the aesthetics maintained, and I want to see this sacred historical space maintained, please. But to be fair, if vinyl siding was put on since 1960 and there's been changes within it and around it, then the owner, in fairness, if he can somehow maintain the architectural historical integrity, has to, I think, also being given guidance, not ruining what's there, but finding a meeting of the minds where there is some way of finding that happy medium, because we know we want that space restored and we want the building we see restored. You know, but there could be a lot of ways that this could be done architecturally, historically, researching what buildings have looked like, where that can be maintained and maybe even improved and restored even further to what it was many years ago. This is the thought.
It is a great thought. This commission is not asking the owner of the property to remove the shingles, the siding. We're not asking that. If they wanted to, then we have a certificate of appropriateness meeting where we look at what they want to replace it with. And we have input about the different styles and what time period, and how much are the costs and the benefits. That's why we exist, to do what we do. So,
Well,
but we haven't asked them to do that
I
yet.
hope you vote to save it from being demolished.
Thank you. Thank you. So many good points. So many cool people from the community have come out tonight, and thank you.
Sorry, Jeff Zuckerman. I live at 24 Bronx Street. Something happened a year ago or a little longer, and I can't stop thinking about it. It was a smokestack behind the Riverview, okay? It had not been designated as historical landmark, okay? And when Riverview went up 20-something years ago, they signed the condition of approval, and it said, we'll maintain that smokestack. That's what they said. We'll maintain the smokestack. That was Hodgman Rubber Company, Borough's Welcome, Revlon. It went on it was 140 years old. It was standing perfectly straight. And because they didn't maintain it for 20 years as they said they would, a few of the bricks were coming out. And they got a law firm, they got an architectural firm first to say, oh yeah, it's not going to fall down. This thing's not going to fall down. When that didn't fly, they got another architectural firm to say, oh, this is dangerous. This is dangerous. And they got a zoning board, and I hope they're listening, the zoning board in Tuckahoe. 5 people had absolutely no need for that smokestack. They didn't have a single problem with that smokestack coming down. And it came down. And those of us who really cared about it and saw it and have lived here for so long, like my wife was born here in 1954, the people that have lived here for so long, they knew that. And it was historical and it was wonderful. And the people in Riverview looking out, looked out and said, what the hell is that? We live in these beautiful apartments. We've got to look at this smokestack? Yeah, well, the developer who put up those apartments said he would maintain that smokestack. That was a condition of his approval. He didn't do it. And our building department didn't make him do it. And the zoning board all hated that smokestack. And the developer got what he wanted. He got 6 parking spaces. And Joni Mitchell was right, you know, take Paradise and put up a parking lot. And they got 6 spaces, and the smokestack came down. I have 2 of the bricks. And if the zoning board, which hasn't met in 2 years in person, ever decides to meet again, I'm going to bring the bricks in. But they continue to meet Zoom, so I can't show them the bricks. But it was a crime. It was an absolute crime. And the chair of the zoning board had a son who lived in Riverview. And he recused himself. But he was the chair of the zoning board. He recused himself. And all the other 4 people said, oh, that smokestack's got to come down. And it came down. It was an absolute crime. And I hope you guys do better. Thank you. Oh, the planning board. Sorry. Sorry. It's the planning board. And his son lived in this.
Thank you. Thank you. So I mean, Tuckahoe is a small world, right? It's a village where, with Bronxville and Eastchester, and even within Westchester, a lot of us are neighbors. And what I'm hearing tonight is that Historic preservation has a place in our community because of the value we place on the tangible and intangible characteristics of place, which we've talked a lot about at this commission. Not, and I'm hearing that. Please.
Can't be as animated as my predecessor, but I'm Peter McGovern. I'm from Wilton, Connecticut. My family resided in Eastchester, Tuckahoe for 50 years, from 1952 to 2002. We lived on Winslow Circle for 43 of those years, at number 30 Winslow Circle from 1959 onwards. And I just want to make really two comments. I see an analogy here to another historical structure located at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. It was more recent, it had a fire more recently than the Ward House. It was also destroyed by the British in 1812. And if the town historians can back me up, I believe 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue was rebuilt with Tuckahoe marble.
In the White House.
So there is a connection in life. But more relevant to, I guess, the topic is from our vantage point at 30 Winslow Circle, which is diagonally across. 36 is directly across, 30 is one house down. So I had a great view, and I moved onto the street when I was 9 years old. We had lived in the Huntley area in Eastchester prior to that. And I was probably too young to take advantage of the Concordia co-eds that were residing there, but I did see the usage over a number of years. I guess from when we moved in 1959, I guess it was 25 years later, Concordia leased the property out, or some arrangement with Iona College. So then we started to have Iona College co-eds move onto the street. So I think from the year 1998 to 2000 is when Iona College started to have its co-eds reside there. And so my observation is the building was occupied for maybe 8 or 9 months of the year, so it was never a 12-month occupancy. Summers were always peaceful, but there were never any crazy parties going on there, no loud bands. And most of the students had books in their hands, were studying, and did everything they should as college students. But I guess my final point is, living on Winslow Circle, growing up there, related to the historical significance of the location is, back in the 60s, the Tuckahoe Memorial Day Parade would form and organize on Winslow Circle. And it would march up, cross 22, and down to Depot Plaza, where it culminated. The first stop on that journey up was at the Crawford Monument and the Ward House at the top. The veterans were always first, and I think in 1959, the World War II vets were probably all in their 30s, early 40s. The World War I vets were in their 60s. I remember Spanish-American War vets, being the pride of the parade. But the first stop would be at the Crawford Monument and the Ward House at the top of the hill. Then proceed down Winter Hill Road to the World War Memorial, where the next ceremony occurred, and then onward further down Main Street. So the area is just ripe with history. It affected me growing up, in appreciating that history, and I just want to impart to the community that the usage of the house seems very sturdy to me. I observed it for close to 50 years, or actually 43 years. I have not been inside the building to examine it, but the usage was somewhat benign. Certainly wear and tear has impacted it over the years, and I'm sure a way can be found to make the property viable. Thank you.
Thank you. Another example of why we encourage people to share with us. We've said it before, facts and stories related to historic buildings in our village. I'm just looking at the clock now. We've been going for 2 hours straight here. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try to make this really brief. We heard mention of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue as a very illustrious, famous piece of real estate. This real estate can also, what we have here in Tuckahoe, makes me think of another very important property located on the Potomac River, which is George Washington's restored Mount Vernon. Over 150 years after the Revolution, there were some ladies that were taking a pleasure cruise on the Potomac, and as they passed by, they noticed a derelict structure up on the hill, and they realized to their horror that that was Mount Vernon. And talk about a derelict structure. Again, the structure was compromised. It was ramshackle for decades. When you want to talk about safety and structural damage, it was found that there was a ship's mast that was holding the entire house together, among other things. I can tell you, I'm no architect, but I'm sure that that's not a good thing. So in the ladies' opinion, they were aghast at allowing this kind of property to fall into ruin, and they created the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. And over time, they put together funds, everyone contributed, and as Madam Chairman mentioned before, it was a community effort. And I applaud both Madam Chairman and the gentleman here who had mentioned that some way has to be made perhaps to help support the new homeowner, because there are expenses, unforeseen and foreseen. I'm a homeowner myself, so I understand putting out a big amount of money for something like this and then being perhaps unpleasantly surprised. So this would be a great opportunity for the community to help support him, and for him also to support the community. So I don't want to make out anybody to be, a demon side or anything like that, but there's got to be a mutual resolution, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Elaine Provenzano, 11 River Street, Tuckahoe, New York. I am with the Friends of the Ward House. I'm also children's librarian, the Tuckahoe Library. I know a lot of people in the community. I was born and raised here. My maiden name is Pagliaroli. My parents bought a house on River Street, my great-grandparents, in 1912 that we still reside in. And we have a great reverence for history. But the Ward House is not just a reverence for any history. As a community, we have an opportunity to save this, as Mariam was saying, for the future, for our children. This is living history, Revolutionary War history, indigenous lands. The house was originally bought from Native Americans. The Ward House marble was first discovered on Ward House property. The first Catholic Mass was said in the Ward House for the Irish quarry workers. And it was a tavern and a stagecoach, and then went on in other iterations, and finally as a college dorm. I was in the Ward House over 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago, for the centennial. It was beautiful and lovely. And regarded as such. And we can forget our history if we don't teach it. And I'm meeting people every day that don't know about it. They don't know about the Crawford Monument, what that represents. They don't know that blood was shed on that property. That's a sacred ground. And that property hasn't been touched for almost 300 years. And so we could be a hero here. We could be a Williamsburg. We can take this and help the developer as a community. The house is already eligible for recognition at the state and national level, and it only needs the owner's consent to be eligible for grants, I think, of over $500,000, and other grants as well. There's many foundations. And the Friends of the Ward House would be very happy to help and assist in that way. So I thank you for all your considerations, and I thank you for, I hope that you will
consider the testimony that the house is in good repair and should be saved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. No, again, to everyone for sharing the information and valuable commentary with us. We started out this meeting with the question that I appreciate everyone sticking to as we have gone through this meeting, which is a very important one. And I believe that some good questions were asked, some good answers were provided. I believe this commission has information to digest, and that this commission is able to take some time to deliberate, being that our next meeting will be held in June. I'm not shutting us down, I'm just saying that, yes.
You've heard from the public. What we
Mhm.
do is, if you're inclined, you close the public meeting. That will give you 62 days to vote. But what I would suggest you do is leave the public comment period open for about 3 weeks for written comments. It also gives the applicant an opportunity to respond to what he heard tonight.
Mhm.
And then by 3 weeks, you'll have all the information I think you're going to need to make a vote.
Mhm.
You'll have 62 days from, if you do close it today, to
Mhm.
make that decision.
Okay. So that would involve closing the public hearing tonight.
Correct.
With a vote.
With a vote.
With a vote. But the public comment period would be open for another 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's what I would suggest. Lee, this is 3 weeks. I know you probably would like time to respond to what you heard tonight.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for taking the time tonight. 3 weeks is fine. We'd like to respond in writing to everything that's been said. And 3 weeks is fine, and we would support closing the public hearing and leaving the comment period.
And the 3 weeks, again, you'll keep it open to the public comment too. So if somebody's not here that couldn't make it tonight and wants to put writing in, that would be fine also.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, with that option, is there anyone who would want to say anything else before we decide by a potential vote whether or not to close this public hearing? Should we take the vote? Okay, well, having heard over 2 hours worth of important information and with the intention of deliberating upon that information to answer the very serious question before us, is there a motion that we close tonight's public hearing to consider the Certificate of Appropriateness application for 230 White Plains Road, also known as the Ward House, knowing full well that public comments could be submitted to us and likely will be within the next 3 weeks? Do I have a motion?
So moved. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we are closing the public hearing on the Certificate of Appropriateness for the demolition aspect in particular for 230 White Plains Road. We will need to set a meeting for June. And 62 days, I know technically, but we'll be meeting in June anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's up to the board, and you don't
Okay.
have to. Again, you don't have to vote in June, but you have 62 days in which to vote.
Okay.
You know, if there's 3 weeks of public comment period, that might be tight with the voting in June, but I leave that up to the board.
Okay. Duly noted and under advisement, we will take the suggestion.
Do you want to set the meeting as we normally do? Just we'll figure out a date.
Yeah.
For everybody, and then
Let's
we'll
do
post it
that.
online.
Let's do that. Good? Good. So that date is TBD and will be announced. Which brings us to our miscellaneous business, if anyone has anything to add.
Mr. Luisi?
No, I'm good.
We really want to thank everyone for coming out tonight and for those who submitted their letters. It's an important topic. It actually isn't over yet because for the last few meetings I've been telling jokes. And I've been telling these jokes at the end of the meeting, but you know what I've realized?
Hey, everyone, the meeting's not over. Hello?
The best is yet to come.
We can just have quiet for a second. I know a joke's coming.
No, my jokes do clear the room, but I have told jokes in the past. But you know what? I realized I shouldn't tell jokes. My jokes are terrible. They're like dad jokes. I am not a dad. I'm a mom, but I'm not a dad. So me attempting to tell funny dad jokes just makes me a faux pas. No? Subtle? Subtle enough? I'm sorry. Okay, I tried. I did try, but thank you again to everyone for coming out. If there is nothing else, now we can end the meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.